All right, ready to dive into the world of Danish filmmaker Anders Thomas Jensen.
Sounds good.
And remember, pronounce it Jensen, not Jensen.
Jensen. Got it.
Okay, good. So he really carved out this fascinating space for himself, kind of blending these bleak comedies, with some pretty heavy philosophical questions, and then these characters that you just can't help but love. It's a little bit Coen Brothers with a very Nordic feel, don't you think?
That's a really good comparison with the Coen brothers. I think, though, what makes Jensen stand out is this melancholy that runs under everything, all the humor. It's like he's really getting at something deeper about us as humans. We're looking for meaning, connection in this world that often feels, just absurd and chaotic.
And he's been at it for a while, right? Didn't he win an Oscar pretty early on?
He did.
For a short film called Election Night back in '99. So this isn't something new for him, this ability to blend all these elements together.
Yeah, he's had time to really perfect his craft.
And what I find interesting is that he spent a lot of time actually writing for other directors before he started directing his own films.
Absolutely. And you can tell his scripts are just so tight, so well structured.
Yeah.
He knows how to build these complex stories, often with multiple storylines that, they all kind of come together in these surprising ways. Like take Flickering Lights, for example.
Oh.
One of his early successes as a writer. It's a crime comedy with 4 kind of bumbling criminals who are on the run. But then there's this really heartwarming subplot about, finding family where you least expect it. And that's what he does so well, balancing the dark and the light, the humor and the pathos. That's his signature, really.
And then he takes the director's chair for The Green Butchers.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about dark humor. I mean, 2 brothers selling human meat.
Right.
To save their butcher shop. It's about as dark as it gets.
Yeah.
But somehow, he makes it funny.
He does. It's a tricky balance.
How does he pull that off?
I think it's the characters, honestly. They're so flawed, making these awful decisions.
Yeah.
But then you see their vulnerability, right? Their desperation. You almost start to feel bad for them.
Oh, yeah.
And the way he uses humor, it's often very dry and understated.
Yeah.
To kind of cut through the horror of it all. It's really masterful.
It's like he's saying, hey, life is messy. People do bad things, but can we at least laugh about it?
Exactly. It's about acknowledging the absurdity of it all without, condoning the bad behavior.
Finding the humanity within the darkness.
Exactly.
And all the while, he's asking these deep questions.
Yeah.
About morality, fate, what does life even mean? Like in Adam's Apples.
Oh, such a great film.
Where we see Mads Mikkelsen playing this priest who's wrestling with his own faith. All the while, he's trying to redeem a neo-Nazi.
Yeah.
I mean, the film is just packed with these moments that really make you think.
It is.
But they never feel preachy or heavy-handed because there's always this wry humor woven throughout.
That's so true. It's like that scene where the neo-Nazi Adam insists that his apple tree is possessed by Satan, and the priest, Ivan, he just deadpans, it's probably just aphids. It's hilarious.
It is.
But it also perfectly sums up their completely different worldviews. You've got Adam clinging to this fantastical explanation for why things are going wrong. And then Ivan, with his doubts, he represents this more, grounded perspective, even a bit cynical.
Yeah, I see that. And you mentioned Mads Mikkelsen, and I think it's time we talk about his collaborations, not just with Mikkelsen, but also Nikolaj Kaas.
Oh, definitely.
These 2 actors just pop up in so many of Jensen's films.
They do.
And they really embody this specific type of character that you just come to expect in a Jensen film.
Absolutely. They're both such talented actors, and they've got this incredible range. They can go from broad comedy to really subtle drama seamlessly. Yeah. And they bring so much depth, even to the most eccentric character.
Yeah, take Mikkelsen in Adam's Apples. I mean, he can convey so much with just a look. A slight change in his expression. And then you see him in Men in Chicken.
Oh, man.
Playing one of the most bizarre characters I've ever seen on film.
Totally.
Yet, somehow, you end up feeling for him.
You do.
Men in Chicken, I think that film really feels like the culmination of Jensen's style.
In a lot of ways.
It's so out there, so unapologetically weird.
It is.
But it still manages to touch on these universal themes of family belonging, that search for identity.
Right.
But I gotta say, I think it pushed some buttons for audiences. It wasn't for everyone.
It definitely pushed boundaries. And, it really sparked a lot of debate. Like, how far can you take dark comedy before it just becomes, unpleasant?
Right.
But that's what makes Jensen so fascinating. He's not afraid to challenge his audience. to make them squirm a little, all while making them laugh.
And his work isn't just confined to Denmark. He's had screenplays adapted by Hollywood,
Oh, that's right.
which shows how his work has really resonated beyond his own country.
It really has.
So Flickering Lights was remade as brothers with Tobey Maguire and Jake Gyllenhaal. And then there's In China, They Eat Dogs. He co-wrote that one.
Yep.
And it was loosely adapted, kind of into The Hangover Part 3. Now, those adaptations, they didn't really capture everything that makes a Jensen film.
Right.
A Jensen film. But they do show how his storytelling, it appeals to a wider audience.
Oh, absolutely.
It's fascinating how his work manages to be so distinctly Danish.
Yeah.
That dry wit, that social commentary. But at the same time, it connects with people all over the world.
It's proof that humor, even when it's dark, even when it's absurd, can cross cultural lines, especially when it's grounded in something we all experience, something human.
So for our listeners who are just now discovering Anders Thomas Jensen,
Yeah.
what are the key things they should keep in mind as they start exploring his films?
Well, first and foremost, be ready for the unexpected. His films are full of surprises, both in terms of what happens and the humor, and embrace the absurdity. It's all part of the fun. But beneath all that weirdness, there are these really human stories about flawed characters trying to find their place in the world.
Feels like we've only scratched the surface here.
All we have.
There's so much more to unpack about Jensen's work, especially those more recent films like Men and Chicken and Riders of Justice.
Absolutely. And those films, they really show how he's continued to grow as a filmmaker, all while staying true to his themes, his style.
Okay, so let's dive into those specific films after a quick break. Stick with us. Okay, so we've got Anders Thomas Jensen, master of dark humor, philosophical explorations, and these oddly endearing characters. But for our listeners who are just starting out with his films, where do we even begin?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for those wanting to get a feel for his early work, The Green Butchers is a great starting point. You've got that classic Jensen mix, quirky characters, a premise that's totally absurd, and then there's this really poignant undercurrent running through it all.
I agree with you there. And it really showcases Mads Mikkelsen and Nikolaj Kaas, that long-time collaboration he has with those actors.
Oh, yeah.
Their comedic timing is just perfect, especially in that scene. You know, the one where they're trying to get rid of the evidence?
Oh my gosh, yes, it's so darkly comedic, that whole scene.
Speaking of dark comedy, we can't forget Adam's Apples. I think this film really shows off how Jensen can deal with these big themes, faith, redemption.
Yeah.
But he never loses that sense of humor. Like, never.
Never.
There's this one scene where Ivan, the priest, is trying to explain to Adam, the neo-Nazi, about helping your neighbor.
Right.
And Adam just doesn't get it. I mean,
Yeah.
completely clueless. And Ivan, he's so patient, but you can tell he's getting weary. Brilliant.
Oh, it's such a great scene. It's a classic Jensen moment. He uses humor to point out how absurd we are, as humans. But then there's also this glimmer of, like, a real connection that can happen even between the most unlikely people.
Exactly. Okay, shifting gears a little, there's Flickering Lights.
Okay.
This one leans more towards crime comedy.
Yeah.
But it still has that signature Jensen heart. And it was one of his screenplays that got picked up by Hollywood, right?
Right.
It shows you it has that broader appeal.
It does. And what I find really interesting about Flickering Lights is how it plays with this whole idea of found family. These four criminals, total losers, essentially.
Yeah.
They end up forming this bond, with these small town folks. And it just shows that Jensen can find these moments of hope and connection in the most messed up people, the most dysfunctional characters.
It's true. And then there's In China, They Eat Dogs,
Oh, yeah.
which he co-wrote. Now this one, strap yourself in. It's a wild, outrageous ride.
It is.
Crazy schemes, over-the-top characters.
So many memorable lines.
It was loosely adapted for Hollywood too, but it really went in a different direction.
Oh, for sure. It didn't quite capture that Jensen magic.
No, not quite. All right, now we got to talk about what many consider to be his masterpieces, Men and Chicken and Riders of Justice.
Oh, yeah.
These films, they feel like everything he's been doing, all his themes, his willingness to kind of push the boundaries, it all comes together here.
I agree, 100%. Men and Chicken, it defies categorization.
Oh, it does.
It's just this bizarre, often grotesque look at family secrets and, what it means to be human. The performances, Mads Mikkelsen, David Dencik, playing these two really strange brothers. unforgettable.
It's a film that people either love or hate. There's no middle ground.
Right.
But you got to admit, it's original.
Oh, absolutely. No one can deny that. And it definitely got people talking about dark comedy, like where's the line?
Yeah, yeah. And then there's Writers of Justice. This one's interesting. It's almost a departure for him, genre-wise. It's more of an action thriller.
It is.
But it still has that Jensen humor, those quirky characters that you just can't help but love. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it.
Oh, me too.
Mikkelsen is just fantastic as Marcus, this soldier who's dealing with so much grief, so much anger.
Yeah.
And the supporting cast, brilliant. Nikolaj Kaas is in there, too.
Oh, of course. Wouldn't be a Jensen film without him, almost. What I find so interesting about Writers of Justice is how it tackles this whole idea of fate, and chance.
Yeah.
On the surface, it's about revenge, but when you look closer, you see how these random events, they're all connected in these really weird ways.
It's true. And it shows how Jensen can balance intense action with these moments of real tenderness, genuine humor. The scene where Marcus is trying to connect with his teenage daughter
Oh, yeah.
breaks your heart, but it's also hilarious.
It's those little moments of humanity that he captures so well.
So for our listener who's ready to jump into Jensen's later work, where should they start? Men and Chicken, even though it's a little out there,
Yeah.
or Writers of Justice, which is maybe a little more accessible.
That is the tough one. I think it depends on how much weirdness you can handle. Men and Chicken is definitely more challenging, but if you're open to it, it's so rewarding.
I'm leaning towards Writers of Justice as a good entry point. It's got a bit of everything: action, humor, heart, and that trademark Jensen quirkiness.
Yeah, I think that's a great choice. It'll surprise you with how deep it goes, how emotional it gets, and then once you've seen that, you're ready for the glorious weirdness of Men and Chicken.
Exactly. So we've covered a lot: Jensen's early work, like The Green Butchers, his later masterpieces. But for our listener, what's the takeaway here? What makes this filmmaker tick? What makes his approach to storytelling so unique?
I think the key takeaway is this. Anders Thomas Jensen, he's not afraid to be uncomfortable. He pushes boundaries, explores the dark side of who we are, and he finds humor in places you wouldn't expect. But at the heart of it all, he has this deep empathy for his characters, even when they're messed up, eccentric.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's that empathy, that ability to make us care about these characters, even when they're doing terrible things.
Yeah.
That's what makes his film so compelling.
Right. He makes us question everything, good and evil, right and wrong. He helps us see the world through the eyes of people who are often overlooked, misunderstood.
And I think another reason his films stick with you is because he's not afraid to embrace the absurd.
No, he's not.
Life is full of crazy twists and turns, and his films reflect that.
They do.
They can be silly, over the top. They push the limits of what we think is okay.
And that absurdity, it's a way for him to point out deeper truths. By exaggerating things, he makes us see the world differently. We recognize the humor, the tragedy.
Yeah.
It's all there in everyday life.
And for me, it's the way it all looks, you know? The visuals, those stark landscapes, desolate, but also beautiful. Creates this atmosphere, both uneasy and captivating.
Oh, absolutely. The visuals are so important in his films. It's not just the landscapes, it's everything. The way he frames the shots, the colors, the light, the music.
Yeah.
It all comes together to create this experience, something you just don't forget.
Okay, so listener, why should you care about Anders Thomas Jensen and his films? If you're looking for something different, something that will challenge you, make you laugh, maybe even change the way you see things,
Yeah.
check out his work.
You're not going to find easy answers or predictable plots, but you will find characters that you can't shake, stories that make you question everything, and humor that's dark but also, strangely, makes you feel good.
He's a filmmaker who reminds us that even when things are dark, absurd, there's still beauty, humor, and hope.
So true.
And don't we all need a little more of that right now?
We do. His films are proof that stories can connect us, make us think, and remind us that we're all human, we're all in this together.
So we've been through a lot. From The Green Butchers, all that dark humor, to the characters in Adam's Apple, so poignant. And then the wild ride of Men and Chicken. But what is it about Jensen's films? Why do they stick with you? Why should our listeners care about this Danish filmmaker?
I think it boils down to this. He's got this knack for tapping into something we all feel, something universal. It's the search for meaning, what is family, that struggle to, find redemption. And he makes it entertaining, but also gets you thinking. It's that blend of humor and sadness. Unique, but so engaging.
It's like he's holding a mirror up, showing us all our flaws. The absurdity of it all. But there's this reminder, too, right, that we're all human. He doesn't shy away from the dark stuff, but he finds these glimmers of hope, those connections that, I don't know, make life feel worthwhile.
A lot of it comes down to the characters, too. So flawed, driven by selfish stuff, misguided ideas, but there's something about them. You want them to succeed, even when they're messing up so badly.
Right, like the brothers in The Green Butchers. They're doing something awful, but you kind of feel for them. Their desperation, you know, or Adam in Adam's Apples. I mean, come on, he's a neo-Nazi.
Yeah.
But somehow, Jensen lets you see the human side.
Exactly, and that's what Jensen does. Makes you confront your own prejudices. Look past the surface, see the world through someone else's eyes, people who are often pushed to the margins.
Another thing, his willingness to just go for it, embrace the absurd. Life throws curveballs, right? Unexpected stuff happens. And his films reflect that. They're not afraid to be silly over the top, to push the boundaries of what's considered okay.
And it's that absurdity that helps him get to those deeper truths. By exaggerating things, he makes us see the world in a new light. It's the humor and the tragedy side by side, just like in real life.
And for me, it's the visuals. The way he uses those stark, off kind of empty landscapes creates this feeling of beauty, but also unease. Adds another layer to the story. This isolation, this feeling of being alone, it mirrors what's going on inside his characters.
Oh, absolutely. The visuals are essential to his films. Not just the landscapes, but how he sets up the shots, the colors, light, even the music. Everything is intentional. Creates an experience you just don't forget.
So listener, what's the takeaway?
Yeah.
Why should you care about Anders Thomas Jensen and his films? If you're looking for something different, something that will challenge you, make you laugh, maybe even change how you see the world, go check out his work.
Don't expect easy answers or plots you can predict. What you will find. Characters that stay with you long after the film is over, stories that make you question everything, and a kind of humor that's dark but also strangely uplifting.
He's a filmmaker who shows us that even when things are dark, even when they're absurd, there's still beauty, there's humor, there's hope.
So true.
And I think we can all use a little bit of that, right?
Absolutely. His films prove that stories have power. They connect us, they make us think. They remind us that we're all human, all in this together.
So there you have it. Go dive into the world of Anders Thomas Jensen. Weird, wonderful, utterly captivating. You won't be disappointed.